Hi, I'm James Kohler, and welcome to the first module of Total Body Blueprint on cardio and weight loss. Over the next 5 weeks, I ask that you stop doing one thing: stop consuming fitness information. It's ridiculous how much information is at our fingertips nowadays, and this can cause a paralyzing effect. It starts to feel like, what's the point? I'm never going to figure this out on my own. Throughout the course, I'll provide you with scientific principles that are effective, but keep it simple enough for you to apply on your own. And I encourage you to often refer back to the corresponding texts on this page to gain a thorough understanding of the principles we reviewed together. Let's go ahead and get started. Weight loss isn't complicated, and there's no hidden secret. It's simple math, really. Calories in versus calories out. For you to lose body fat, you need to create a calorie deficit, meaning you expend more calories than you consume during the course of the day. For instance, if your caloric intake for the day was 2,000 calories and you burned 2,500, your calorie deficit is 500. The calories burned throughout the day include your physical activity and resting metabolic rate. This is your energy you burn just to sustain your normal bodily functions without any activity at all. Basically, how many calories you burn if you lie in bed all day long. For every 1 pound of fat, you need to expend 3,500 calories. So if you average a calorie deficit of 500 per day, your total would equate to 3,500 calories for that week. And in theory, you'd burn 1 pound of fat. A healthy rate of fat loss is 1 to 2 pounds per week. On the flip side, if you consumed a calorie surplus of 500 calories on average each day, you would gain 1 pound of fat. As you can see, it's very important to understand energy balance, as it's the basis of weight management. An excellent tool for monitoring caloric intake and expenditure is the Fitbit. You may have one or have heard of it. It's a small device you can keep in your pocket or wear as a wristband that tracks all your physical activity and steps burned for the day. Then you can easily input your food consumption using their website or mobile app. I give a thorough tutorial on how to use this during my FitRx program. Now that we know that calories are the basis of weight loss, let's take a look at the most efficient way to burn calories when exercising. Today we'll discuss cardiovascular training strategies, as resistance training will be reviewed in our next module. When it comes to performing cardio bouts, there's a big misconception known as the fat burning zone. You can find it depicted on some pieces of cardio equipment, where 65% of your max heart rate is deemed the fat burning zone, and 85% is deemed the cardiovascular training zone. Well, this isn't necessarily true when it comes to fat loss. This viewpoint stems from the fact that you burn more fat when you train at lower intensities, such as 60 to 65% of your max heart rate. At this intensity, fat stores fuel approximately 50% of your energy, whereas at an intensity of 80 to 85%, you burn only 40% fat. The catch is the amount of calories burned during the cardio bout, and therefore net fat loss. Say in a 30-minute cardio session at the lower intensity, you burn 200 calories. If you do the math, 50% of 200 equal 100 net fat calories. Now, if you did a 30-minute session at the higher intensity and burned 300 calories, your net fat calories would be more. 120 to be exact. 300 times 40 equals 120. Despite the lower percentage of energy coming from fat, the higher intensity is always going to win in burning overall net fat calories. In fact, you're actually burning the most calories by sitting down right now. Close to 100% of your energy comes from fat stores during the sedentary state. But obviously you won't burn enough calories for this to even matter. So what's a good way to perform cardio then? It would be impractical to sustain an intensity of 80 to 85% of your max heart rate for a whole 30-minute workout bout, even for elite athletes. This intensity is past what we call the anaerobic threshold, the point where the activity becomes anaerobic or without oxygen. You're not able to sustain this intensity for long durations. That's why we implement high-intensity interval training. This is the most efficient method to burn calories and decrease fat. To do this, start with a 3 to 5 minute warm-up. Then you ramp up the intensity for 60 seconds for what's called the work interval, and then lower the intensity for 60 seconds for the rest interval. You keep repeating the intervals in this fashion for the entire bout, followed by a 3 to 5 minute cool down. You can start with any work to rest ratio you feel is commensurate with your fitness level. You may want to start with a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 work to rest ratio. For example, you train at a high intensity for 1 minute and then a low to moderate intensity for 1 or 2 minutes. People that are more deconditioned may want to start with a 1-to-3 ratio. You can also change the lengths of the intervals and go 30 seconds high intensity, followed by 30 to 60 seconds lower intensity. As you progress, you may even be able to perform your cardio in a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio, as you're able to recover quicker between your intervals. As an example, a 2-to-1 ratio would be a 60-second high intensity and a 30-second low. Well, how do you gauge intensity? One would be to use your heart rate, and this is best for people that are more analytical and want precise numbers. However, there are a couple limitations with this system, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The most accurate way we establish target heart training zones is what we call the Karvonen method. To calculate this, you need to subtract your age from 220. This is your age predicted max heart rate. Since I'm 35, mine is 185 beats per minute. Then subtract your resting heart rate. Resting heart rate should be measured first thing in the morning when you rise from bed. Find your radial pulse with your 4 and middle fingers. You don't want to use your thumb as it has its own pulse. When you feel the first beat, start with a count of 0, and you continue counting for at least 15 seconds. So you'll count 0, 1, 2. If you stop at 15 seconds, multiply that number by 4 and you have your resting heart rate. But the most accurate way would be to measure your pulse for the full 60 seconds. After subtracting your resting heart rate from max heart rate, you'll have your heart rate reserve. This is the number you multiply by 80 and 85% to determine your high intensity training range. Finally, you'll add back in your resting heart rate. I hope I haven't lost you. Let's look at an example to paint a clearer picture. Let's calculate an 88 to 85% target heart rate for a person that's 40 years old with a resting heart rate of 65. We'll use the following equation. Target heart rate equals max heart rate minus resting heart rate times the intensity plus resting heart rate. To calculate, we subtract 40 from 220 to get a max heart rate of 180. Then we subtract his resting heart rate of 65 to get 115, or what we call his heart rate reserve. Next, we multiply by his targeted training intensity, in this case 80%, and we get 92. Finally, we need to add back in his resting heart rate, which comes out to be 157 beats per minute. Then you repeat the calculation for the 85% intensity, which calculates to 163 for this individual. Therefore, this person's target heart rate would be 157 to 163 beats per minute for a training intensity of 80 to 85%. This is the intensity people without medical issues should perform their high intensity portions of interval training. You can download the target heart rate sheet form to the right of your screen to determine your own training zones. As I previously mentioned, there are a couple limitations with this method with using heart rate. One is the age factor. The age predicted formula is not accurate for everyone. Someone might be 50 years old but might not have a max heart rate of 170. On the other hand, it might be lower than 170. The only true way to measure max heart rate is to do a VO2 max test. And I've performed hundreds of these tests at the California Health and Longevity Institute. It's where the person being tested steps on a bike or a treadmill and they're hooked up to a max and a hose to measure gas exchange. The maximum oxygen consumption during the test is their VO2 max, and this can be correlated to their max heart rate. This is the most accurate way. It's more accurate than using age-predicted calculations. Another restriction to using heart rate to gauge intensity is not being able to accurately measure your intensity during the rest portion of the intervals. When your heart rate reaches that high of a level, it takes some time for it to come back down. So when you're doing your rest segment, your heart rate might still be 75% of your max heart rate. When I prescribe interval training, I give heart rates of 50 to 55% for the rest segments and 80 to 85% for the work. If you go ahead and do the calculation for 50 to 55% max heart rate, the range comes out to be 118 to 123 for the same 40-year-old gentleman I used before. But when he does the interval training and reaches the rest portion, it's unlikely his heart rate will come down to this level, as it typically stays more elevated after a vigorous workout bout. That's why I suggest rate of perceived exertion to execute interval training sessions, at least for the rest portions. Rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, is a subjective measurement where you take into account your rate and depth of breathing, perspiration, lactic acid buildup in the legs, and other markers to determine your overall exertion level. It's a scale that goes from 0 to 10. 0 is no exertion at all, or standing still. 2 is weak. 3, the activity feels moderate. 4 is somewhat strong. 5 is strong, 7 is very strong, and 10 is a maximal all-out effort, like sprinting full speed. You can download the RPE scale to the right of your screen. With interval training, you want to aim for an RPE of 7 to 9 during the work intervals and 3 to 4 during the rest. Remember that anaerobic threshold I mentioned? This usually occurs at an RPE of 6. When performing intervals, we want to train past that threshold for the work intervals, which is around 80 to 85% of your max heart rate, or an RPE of 7 or higher. Here, the heart rate coming down during the rest interval won't be an issue. You're gauging your intensity on how hard you're exerting. Another benefit with this method is that you can use it regardless of having a heart rate monitor strap or those hand sensors used on cardio pieces of equipment. The last way of gauging intensity is by using the talk test. This is a simplistic but effective approach. As you perform your intervals, ask yourself if you could carry on a conversation with the person next to you. If the answer is yes, you're training below anaerobic threshold, or what we call AT. But if the answer is no, you're most likely training above AT, and you can use this to gauge your intensity for the work intervals. What modes are best to implement interval training? Through my personal experience and working with clients, I found the treadmill and either stationary or recumbent bike work best. I like to use one variable in manipulating intensities. For the treadmill, you can either increase the speed or the incline. I'd pick one and keep the other consistent during the cardio session. For example, you could choose to walk at 3.5 miles per hour for the whole bout, and then increase the grade for the work intervals, maybe 8% for 1 minute, followed by 0% for the next minute during the rest interval. Another way would be to change the speed. You keep your incline the same, say 2%, and then go from a brisk walk to a run for the intervals. Perhaps 3.5 miles per hour for the rest intervals and 6.5 for the work. For the bike, I like to keep the speed, or RPMs, consistent during the bout and increase the intensity with the resistance levels. As an example, you pedal at 80 RPM for the entire session. For the work intervals, increase the resistance to 14 and then back it down for 8 for the rest. If you're going to perform your cardio more than 3 days per week, then you'll want to integrate steady state training into your program. You see, more is not always better. Training at higher intensities at a higher frequency can lead to overtraining, and that can be just as detrimental as not training enough. High intensity interval training can be taxing on your nervous system. To ensure full recovery, I suggest performing this on non-consecutive days. If you train more than 3 days per week, I'd bridge the interval sessions with steady state days. Steady state or sustained training is simply maintaining the intensity for the entire cardio bout. After the warm-up, you'll want to aim for a target heart rate of 70 to 75% of your max heart rate, or a RPE of 5 or maybe 6. Using the talk test, you should be able to converse with the person next to you. However, the activity should not be so easy as if you could sing. You can also perform steady state bouts longer than intervals. For this reason, and the fact that you don't burn as many calories, I recommend doing 30 to 60 minutes for sustained cardio and 20 to 30 minutes for interval training, not including the warm-up and cool-down periods. For steady state cardio, I like the stair climber in addition to the other modalities I've mentioned. The elliptical is fine too, and you don't have to perform the whole session with one mode. Feel free to break it up. Maybe go 15 minutes on the stair climber, 15 minutes on the bike, and 15 minutes on the treadmill. You also don't have to perform your cardio all in one session. You can break it up throughout the day. Let's say you're doing a steady state training day. You don't have to do the whole 30 to 60 minutes at one time. You could do 20 minutes in the morning, and you could do 20 minutes in the evening. As long as the session is at least 10 minutes in duration, you'll reap the same benefits. In the FitRx program, I typically incorporate cardio bouts after resistance training. This is the most optimal time to perform cardio as your muscle glycogen, or stored carbohydrate, has been depleted and your body's more inclined to use fat to fuel the workout versus the food you last ate. Also, if you did the cardio sessions prior to the weights, you'll sacrifice your strength and energy levels. Finally, cardio can be integrated into your resistance training workout intermittently to keep the heart rate up and create a thermogenic effect called metabolic training. I'll show you exactly how to tie this all together in the FitRx program. As long as you can allocate 3 hours a week to fitness, I've constructed a program that combines all the components to exercise: resistance training, cardiovascular training, and flexibility. Is it easy? No. Is it doable? Yes. Anyone that says you can get in shape in 20 minutes is joking. You're going to have to work for it to a certain extent, but FitRx is practical for people with busy lifestyles. Keep in mind, when you exercise, you energize. This is counterintuitive, as you're expending energy when exercising, but you'll feel the difference in your energy levels afterward. And once you get the endorphins flowing and experience that natural high, you'll start to get more hooked to fitness, especially after you see results. So hang in there and give it a solid 2 to 3 weeks. Between now and the next module on Total Body Blueprint, I want you to pilot interval training as your homework. Try the different modes and methods of gauging intensity and take note of your preferences. Our next lesson will cover all the intricacies of resistance training. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time.